Welcome back to the Woodwork Experience, and today we're looking at the idea generation section of the development of ideas. Now, to begin this, let's just crack open that template file, and from here, let's go through and go File, Save As, or it might be Save a Copy for you, and put in the heading 16 Development of Ideas, Idea Generation. From there, now we've got that there, we want to come through and we want to change that major heading here to Idea Generation. From here, we actually need to go through and we're going to utilize the Scamper Technique. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of the Scamper Technique, that's what this video is all about. We're going to talk you through that. Now, the very first thing you're going to want to do is jump onto Google and find an image that kind of shows what Scamper is all about. And I have this image here. As you can see, it talks through the various steps of Scamper. So S is for substitute, C for combine, A for adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, and reverse. Now, as you can see, it's pretty simple there, but we're going to go into it to talk about exactly how that works when discussing your major project. So, but before we get into that, let's have a look at how to set the rest of this section up. And for this, I would recommend going through and adding a sentence, something like this. Now, as you can see, it's pretty simple. For this section, I will use the Scamper Technique to further consider various design options for my desk. Now, you would apply whatever you're making here. I'm presuming I'm making a desk. Below is the chosen design for my product or project. I will now work through the Scamper Technique and see what changes can be made to adjust, modify, or improve the design. Now, I did mention that below is the chosen design for my product, so let's throw that in there and drop that in. Now, this has come straight from the last document that we added that in. This is where it's going to be a bit different from other videos. In the past, I've gone through and I've given you very specific examples of what it needs to look like, but for this, I think there's enough in the discussion and the explanation of it. But I need you to remember one thing and one thing only. Justify each consideration. Now, when you justify each consideration, it means you need to give the positives, the negatives, and then describe will it add value. Now, you don't need to have this nice big green circle here, but I'm going to throw that there just so that you, of course, remember. Normally, you wouldn't have this in it. Okay, so I've added these headings here, and you've got substitute, combine, adapt, modify, purpose instead of put to another use. I prefer purpose, eliminate, reverse, and rearrange. So I really like those two put together. So as you can see, I have modified this Scamper Technique to kind of fit how I like it best, but each to their own. It doesn't really matter. We're covering the same thing. So under the substitute heading, you're looking at what can be replaced. Now for this, you've of course got different legs could be switched out for sure. Adding different legs, different style of legs. Maybe instead of having the giant cavity, instead of having a leg here, you could add a set of drawers underneath. Could be replaced, still has the same function, but could be replaced there. Potentially instead of having this shelf here, you could have a monitor stand. And if the drawers going in here, well, instead of using timber drawers, could you use drawer slides instead? And so you're trying to think about what in this could be replaced in that section. Now for this, if you've got other designs you're looking at or things, get pictures and discuss them. Like, I don't care if you go through and add one of these and say positives, negatives, will it add value? I don't care if you just write it in headings underneath. It doesn't really matter, but you have to justify. You always have to justify everything you're looking at here. If you can justify, you're going to get high marks. Alrighty, so now we're up to the combined section. Now, this is all about adding other features which could be added to your project. But what other common features could be added to your project? And this is combining ideas from other people and also yourself. So one of them would be, of course, combining your ideas from previous sketches that you've had to maybe try and look at adding a bit of a different style to it or adding extra things. But then there's also combining ideas from other people's projects or other people's ideas and designs as well. So that's looking at maybe different, like really focusing on different storage ideas or different drawers or different ways of joining timber. What could be stolen from a different design to add to your project? So think about this one as common features. What other common features could be added or combined to your project? From here we have adapt. Now, what can be added to enhance the product or make it stand out? Of course, there are a range of things we could add. Now for me, here's a bunch. Well, could you add built-in speakers to your desk? You definitely could. Could you go through and add a wireless charging unit? That'd be sick. What about LEDs? Yeah, and legs that go from sit to stand. These are all things to make your product stand out from the rest. So it's not just like common features like, oh, I'll add some drawers. It's like, whoa, what's something that's going to be like, ooh, that's a cool idea that the market hasn't seen before or isn't common in existing products. Modify comes up next, and it's a pretty simple question. Well, what can be modified on this desk to make it suit its purpose even more? Well, let's have a look at this. Let's have a consideration. Well, of course, you always want to be considering the height, the width, and the depth, so the dimensions of your product, because you need to think about it fitting the space. Don't just go, that's a normal desk height or that's a normal desk size. Like, think about how much, or for me, it'd be how much space do I need for my monitors, my tower, and my keyboard and mouse to sit on? Do I want my monitor far away from me? Do I want it close? So they're things you want to consider. Then you'd consider the materials themselves. Which, are you really sure you want to make it out of that material? Is that giving you the aesthetic that you want? Is it hard or easy to work with? Think about that. Then, of course, think about the thickness of material. Materials or timber comes in a variety of thickness. It goes through, and what do you actually need for your product? Do you want 35? Do you want 19? Does that impact the cost? Well, of course it does. And think about the cost. Now, whilst you're doing all of this, don't forget to justify each consideration. If you haven't justified, go back and justify. Then, of course, you can discuss the color of the product. That could look at the finishes you're going to use, any stains, anything like that. And then, of course, think about the actual finish, like not only the aesthetic it'll give, but what's the finish going to do? Is it going to be a protective layer? Is it going to create a hard plastic hard finish on top so it doesn't get damaged as easily? What's it going to be like? Think about that for the actual intended use of the product. Now, that's just some of these. This can definitely go in. And remember, for all of these, you need to maybe have some pictures, maybe have some sketches, maybe have a little blurb written, and of course, justify. And purpose is always an interesting one, I think, because it starts to be, when you start to look at purpose, you want to consider what other things could this potentially be used for. So if you no longer need it for a computer desk, is there another option where you could design or modify the design so that it'll meet your need, but potentially meet a need in the future? And here are some ideas. So could your home office desk potentially be turned into some sort of poker table or gaming table? I don't know. What about from a desk to an outdoor table for summer events? That may be easy, that may be hard. With the current design, it would be difficult. Potentially, what about a sewing table? Now, you may not sew, but I definitely have a mate who loves to game and his wife loves to sew. And I know that and he updates his table a lot, I should say. I know that a great change there would be designing it so it could not only be a gaming table, but have an end use as a sewing table. So think about different little changes you could make to give it a greater purpose for a longer use period. So if your current needs change, what could it be changed into? The next step is to consider anything you can eliminate from your project. Now, you might do it for a couple of reasons. Number one is because it might actually be too hard for you to make. It's better to have a high quality project than a hard project that's poorly made, at least in my perception. The next thing you want to go through and do is think about, is there anything that needs to be done to make the fabrication process quicker? Because it's all great to have this incredibly difficult, complex design that you are capable of making, but if you can't finish it in the time period, well then you're out of luck. So it's got to be able to be made to a higher standard, and it needs to be finished in the time period. And some of these for this could be, once again, simple, is using butt joints instead of miters, or using other joints instead of butt joints. So consider what joints you're going to use and how much time each of those is going to take up. Then consider, for this design, you could use dowel joints to combine the shelf and cavity to the legs rather than using housing joints. Or you could just remove the shelf itself. Now, once again, these are just concepts that you're considering, and then you can make your choice up from there. Also, depending on how my fabrication is going, if I'm behind schedule, I'll use butt joints. If I'm not, I'll use miters. Things like that. Now, remember, justify. Yes, that's right. I'm that guy to remind you to justify. Positives, negatives, and of course, will it add value to your design? Alrighty, we are up to the very last one. The very last one. And this is reverse and rearrange. Now, for me, this is powerful because it's the last step where you're considering this design and thinking about making any major changes to it. So you've got what could be rearranged in this project, or what could be reversed. For example, could the shelf be moved up or down? Could it be deleted altogether? Could it be put underneath the desk? And then here's the reverse thing. Could the drawers be placed on the reverse side of the product? Could they? Because if they could, well then maybe that will give you greater access for when the door opens into your room. Maybe it won't. Maybe you're right-handed, maybe you're left-handed. Which side do you want those drawers to be on? Not only for aesthetic reasons, but for the practicality of it as well. Have a think about this and come up with a bunch of suggestions. Because once you've got those suggestions locked down, it's a pretty powerful thing that you can make those changes and alter that design, being very intentional about it. So we're up to this ongoing evaluation section, and it's pretty chill to be honest. So let's get into it. So it goes something a little bit like this, and of course yours will be your own. This is just an example of one. The use of the Scamper technique allowed me to really solidify my concept. It has encouraged me to consider a variety of options and to think about the impact they will have on my project. Unfortunately, due to time and cost restraints, I will not be able to add all of them to my desk, but being able to consider their impact has allowed me to gain a greater level of confidence in my design. As it currently stands, I wish to make the following changes to my design. Add a wireless charging unit, make the project out of 19mm thick timber to minimize the cost of the project or product. I will make my project longer and thinner as I've decided that I do not require a meter wide desk for a laptop and an additional screen. Now, of course, you'll go through and add as many more of those as possible as you plan to make changes, because the next stage gets even better. So I'll see you in the next woodwork experience video, and until then, get cracking.